in LGBTIQ fan communities, affecting social change with social media. So my name is Natalie Krikowa, and I'm a creative practice academic here at UTS in digital and social media. And the focus of my presentation today is looking at the role hashtags are played in LGBTIQ fan activist movements, how social media facilitates dialogue between industry and publics, and using a case study of the hashtag LGBT Fans Deserve Better movement to kind of highlight some of these issues. So as my colleagues here have already noted in their earlier presentations, social media and Web 2.0 have really shifted the focus of the internet from one where content can be consumed to one where content can be created, modified, shared, and discussed. So the role of social media as the role of social media has sort of changed in terms of how we're using it, particularly in activist circles. So the reach of social media, as well as its ability to produce and circulate messages in the forms of memes, video clips, and hashtags, as we're talking about today, make it a really valuable tool for activism. And one of the most interesting and influential developments in recent digital social movements is the rise of that hashtag activism, where we see large numbers of social media posts unite under a common hashtag word or phrase. So adding the hashtag sign to words or phrases allows other users on those platforms, such as Twitter, to search, link, interact, and share stories with one another under a common theme. Hashtags also enable the conversation to be facilitated and tracked over time. So research into hashtags has shown a positive link between frequency of social media use and political participation and activist behavior. So groups have engaged the hashtag as a method for mobilizing the public around various social, cultural, or political campaigns, some of which my colleagues have already spoken about today, such as Black Lives Matter, Aboriginal Lives Matter, and the Invasion Day, Australia Day contention, along with other things like the Bring Back Our Girls campaign, the Stop Gamergate, Why I Stayed, Occupy Everywhere, and Muslims Are Not Terrorists, just to name a few of the recent activism campaigns. So hashtag activism has played a crucial role in the ongoing conversation regarding LGBTIQ representation in screen media, and has become a way to hold media producers accountable for the ways in which they are portraying gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, intersex, and queer people. And in recent years, much media attention has been given to the bury your gays trope and queerbaiting that exists in mainstream television. So I am going to go through a couple of those terms just for those who aren't aware of them. So the bury your gays, otherwise known as the dead lesbian syndrome, was first conceived in the 1970s and 80s when characters were killed off in TV specifically because of their sexuality. So this trope applies when a LGBTIQ character is killed off, however, is especially harmful when it occurs shortly after or alongside a positive development with regards to their sexual orientation, further linking the character's sexuality to their death. Queerbaiting involves attracting or baiting a queer audience by using LGBTQ or implied but not actual characters and relationships as bait in order to appeal to the gay dollar and the queer views, without actually following through in order to keep their heterosexual audience. It can also involve promoting and hyping specific episodes as ones not to miss, which is misleading and can have serious consequences. So historically, LGBTIQ characters have not been allowed happy endings. Elizabeth Bridges' work, A Genealogy of Queerbaiting from 2018, draws parallels between the criminalization of homosexuality and the system of queerbaiting in screen media, where the legal codes criminalizing homosexuality were echoed in the treatment of homosexuality in Hollywood. So once mandated by the Hays Code of Broadcasting Standards, LGBT characters were classed as deviant characters and therefore were not to be made sympathetic or rewarded, but rather punished for their deviant behavior. This code and its resulting trope remains pervasive even now, even though now the mainstream attitudes and laws have changed. The issue is not that LGBTQ characters are killed off, but rather that the tendency that these characters, lesbian and bisexual female characters in particular, are killed off far disproportionately to their straight counterparts, and most often in very violent ways. So here's a couple of statistics for you that are relating to the case study that I'm going to be talking about today. So lesbian, bisexual women represented less than 2% of characters on scripted US network television shows in 2015, but made up 10% of the overall deaths. And during the 12-month period between June 1st, 2015 and May 31st of 2016, a total of 35 main or recurring characters included in those 118 scripted primetime television shows were lesbian or bisexual women. And 38% of those characters were killed off by the end of 2016. One of which was Lexa from the 100, who will be the focus of today's case study and the catalyst for the hashtag movement that I will be discussing. So given the low overall numbers of LGBTIQ characters in the media that we can see here, which is not indicative of the numbers seen in society, the significance that these representations provide viewers contributes to sort of the loss that they experience within the LGBTIQ community. So Elizabeth Bridges again summarizes the queer viewing experience as follows. She says, now, if you are a queer and a fan of any mainstream media property, there are a few facts that practically run through your DNA. And they are, 1, you will almost never see yourself represented in your fandom. 2, if you do, it will be subtext only. And 3, on the off chance that that character is canonically gay, he or she will likely be A, evil, B, crazy, or C, killed off right after achieving happy coupledom. So much so that it has that name of the dead lesbian trope. And essentially the message is gay sex is punishable by death and queer couples can never be happy. So when Commander Lexa was introduced to the 100, it soon became obvious to queer audiences that the chemistry between the two characters, which is Lexa on the right here and Clark Griffin on the left, who is the lead character, was more than subtext. When their romantic feelings were confirmed by a reciprocal kiss, queer fans rejoiced, but they also wanted reassurance from the show's producers and writers that this was not going to end badly for these characters. And both the writers and showrunner Jason Rothenberg expressed their passion for these two characters and their blossoming relationship, suggesting there would be rocky roads, but their love for each other was true. In the final days of production on season 3, which is the season that would ultimately see Lexa die, Rothenberg called out on social media for fans to come along to the set in Vancouver and watch the filming of the season 3 finale. So fans flocked to the set to find Clark and Lexa together and alive. And this quashed the rumors that had circulated on social media months earlier that Lexa would be killed off due to the actress Alicia Devon-Carey being signed on as a series regular on the new show Fear the Walking Dead. So when it came to episode 7 of season 3, a couple of days before that aired, a couple of scenes were released prior to that, which showed Lexa and Clark in bed together. And Rothenberg and the writers were live tweeting before, during, and after the show. And hours before the show, Rothenberg sort of posted a tweet, and it said that the episode is a not to miss episode. So naturally, fans flocked to Twitter with different tweets like this one. But yeah, sadly, Lexa was killed in that episode. So this became the catalyst for this movement that I'm going to talk about. So on March 3rd, the episode of The 100, Clark and Lexa finally consummated their slow burn relationship. Fans took to social media in droves during that commercial break that followed the love scene. They were live tweeting their tears of joy, celebrating the moment together as a fandom. However, their bliss was short-lived, as just a couple of minutes later, after the commercial break, in the very next scene, Lexa was killed by a stray bullet that was meant for Clark. So she was shot by her mentor, a man who scolded her repeatedly for loving Clark, stating love is weakness, and Lexa bled out in her lover's arms on the very bed they had just slept in. So Lexa's death was not only violent, but was written in a way that implied she was being punished for loving Clark. So following the episode, devastated and angry fans took to Twitter and Tumblr and YouTube in revolt. And what began as angry posts on social media resulted in a fandom-led revolution. The hashtag Lexa Deserve Better was the initial tag where fans collectively vented their frustrations, their disbelief, their rage, particularly at the series writers and the executive producer, Jason Rothenberg. So this was the beginning of the hashtag movement, and it permeated both online and real-world spaces. And the phrase itself has come to be associated with the fight for LGBT representation in television and media, as well as a way to remember the beloved character. So in the hours and days following the episode's airing, the hashtags Lexa and Lexa Deserve Better was used by fans to express their grief and anger, and trended on Twitter far longer than the show's official hashtag of the 100 did. And the initial posts were of a personal nature. It was very much a personal tweet illustrating the emotional impact that that character's death had had on that viewer. So fans were angered by Rothenberg's initial dismissive responses, and then subsequent silence. So he kind of went silent on the whole thing. And they were devastated at the loss of several young viewers who had taken their lives as a result of Lex's death. The fan community on Twitter then rallied together to promote services such as the Trevor Project, the leading national organization providing crisis intervention and suicide prevention services to LGBTQ young people in the US. And many outside of the LGBTIQA+ community could not understand the outcry or why young kids would have such an extreme reaction to what is, just a television show or just a fictional character. Because characters, including lead and well-loved ones within the 100 show, died very often, and often in brutal ways. Many non-LGBTIQ fans of the show failed to see the difference between Lex's death in season 3 and Finn's death in season 2, who was Clark's first love interest. Now, Finn was a straight white male, and in a large cast, Finn was not alone in that demographic. Lexa, however, was the only lesbian on the show. So Lexa's death was different because she was the only representation that the lesbian audience had, and a character that many in the queer community related to and saw themselves represented in. So on March 3rd, as this graph shows, which was before the episode aired, Jason Rothenberg had over 121,000 Twitter followers. By March 7th, he was down to 107,000. So within 4 days, he had lost 14,000 followers, or approximately 11.5% of his fan base. And the response from media critics and journalists, both in the United States and internationally, was also swift. Media attention brought the issues of queerbaiting and the damaging tropes to the broader public, and a discussion began in various industry circles, not only about Lex's death, but the slew of other lesbian deaths that followed on television in the later months. So when the 100 returned after a 2-week hiatus, many fans boycotted the show and refused to watch, and instead tweeted during the weekly episodes with dissenting hashtags such as "Buried Tropes, Not Us," "Dare to Defy Tropes," and "CW Stop Jason Rothenberg," again, which trended significantly higher than the official series hashtags. The various hashtags used by fans following the death illustrates the attempts to circumvent industrial practices and engage in a dialogue with the writers and the producers of the show. So in a response to Lex's death and Rothenberg's insistence that her death was in service to the story, Heather Hogan of a queer media outlet called Autostraddle came up with a list of 100 storylines that they brainstormed in 5 minutes that don't involve dead lesbians. This premise was taken up by many fans online who took to Twitter and Tumblr to provide alternative ways to write the character off the show that would not result in her death. And they continued to demand an apology from Rothenberg, which he eventually gave. He wrote, quote, "Despite my reasons, I still write and produce television for the real world, where negative and hurtful tropes exist, and I am very sorry for not recognizing this as fully as I should have. Knowing everything I know now, Lex's death would have played out differently." And he continued on in that apology. So unfortunately, that apology came 3 weeks after the episode. And from the perspective of many of the fans, it was a bit too little too late. And yeah, kind of felt a bit pressured by the industry and critical discourse around that time. So the hashtag LGBT fans deserve better was used in the subsequent months and years as queer audiences protested further on-screen deaths of LGBTIQ characters. The hashtag became a catalyst for critical dialogue between concerned audiences, series creators, and media critics more broadly about the social and cultural significance that these deaths were having within the LGBTIQ community. And fans utilized the social media platforms to affect real-world change through acts of boycotting the shows, calling out their sponsors and advertisers, and in channeling their anger and sadness in positive ways to support LGBTIQ charities. They created a fan convention, Klexicon, as a way for queer women and allies to come together and celebrate queer women and characters in television, film, and media, and looked to engage media professionals in to improve writing and industry practices around the portrayal of queer characters in television. And one of the main things that has come out of Alexa's death is a 7-part Lexa pledge that's been signed by numerous writers, producers, directors, and executive producers that essentially say that we will provide more respect to LGBTQ characters. So we will ensure that any significant or recurring LGBTQ character will have significant storylines and meaningful arcs, and that they will engage services like GLAAD and other LGBTIQ writers on staff to kind of ensure that the storylines are treated respectfully. So this sort of third hashtag is the one that's now kind of the lasting one, the one that's been around since 2016 and continues today. I'm just going to, if I've got time, which I'm hoping I do, I'm just going to play a quick video. LGBT Fans Deserve Better movement demonstrates how hashtag activism and queer agency has led a cultural revolution, enacting positive change in the screen industry with organizations like We Deserve Better and this one here, LGBT Fans Deserve Better, that are now dedicated to raising awareness of and advocating for more conscious and considerate media representation of LGBTIQ people. So using the case study of the 100 and the death of Lexa, we can see the capacity and the power of social media in not only engaging industry in dialogue, but in enacting that real world change. So digital and social media activism, particularly in the form of hashtags, gives audiences agency in the discussions of the importance of representation in minorities on screen. So beyond communicating their outrage, the hashtags Lexa Deserve Better, Bury Tropes, Bury Tropes Not Us, Dare to Defy Tropes, CW, Stop Jason Rothenberg, and LGBT Fans Deserve Better demonstrate the power that fan groups possess in the co-constitutive ecology of today's internet. As the ultimate form of citizen protest behavior, hashtag activism can have those real world consequences. And as seen in this case study, activism among the fan base made things like sponsors and advertisers pull their support from the show, hundreds of thousands of dollars raised for LGBTIQ charities, a fan convention that was formed solely dedicated to celebrating and advocating for better queer female representation, and not-for-profit organizations were created to lobby for change at an industrial level. So as Sebastian Valenzuela's 2013 study noted, activism is the ultimate form of citizen protest behavior, as it exists beyond simply using social media to disseminate information and express political opinions, but also facilitates the joining and mobilization of causes through social media. So the narrative of this hashtag activist campaign that I've talked through today had a clear beginning with the death of Lexa and the hashtag Lexa Deserve Better, then that kind of crisis conflict between the series producers and writers and the fans that were engaged on social media platforms with those other hashtags, the Bury Tropes Not Us, Dare to Defy Tropes. And then it ended with this kind of greater campaign of LGBT Fans Deserve Better. So hopefully what it highlights is how people en masse can come together and fight for the change that they want to see in the world and actually do it. And that's it from me. Thank you very much.